the young people who testified yesterday and won universal school meals show you why it's not the right time to give up hope.
Well, hello, listeners, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy.
Nora, what would you do with $37.5 billion?
Girl does like to dream, Marcus. I don't know. Maybe I would refund global health and USAID, but I sure as shit would not start a war of choice with it. I'll tell you that much.
Well, fair enough. Look, that number is not hypothetical. That's the figure Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, or Hegseth, if you will, gave lawmakers this week when he was asked point blank what the Iran war has cost so far. That was $37.5 billion with a B, Nora. Mm-hmm. And Nora, just to put that into context.
Yes, please do, because that is a lot of zeros.
Well, back in April, before the ceasefire that didn't hold, that ceasefire, the Pentagon's estimate was $25 billion. So we're talking about a $12 billion jump in just a few months. And that's before you even get to the separate request. The Trump administration is asking Congress for up to $70 billion more in emergency military funding to keep the whole operation running and restock the arsenal.
Yeah, probably also to buy enough testosterone so that they feel like real men again. Yeah. And this is wild because Hegseth was in that same hearing defending a $1.5 trillion defense budget request for next year. So this is emergency money that's supposed to be on top of that.
Yeah, that's exactly what Senator Patty Murray from right here in Washington State pushed back on. Her read was that calling this in quote unquote emergency is really a way of dodging the normal budget process, that Congress ends up rubber stamping massive spending without the scrutiny it would normally get.
Yes, and it's not just Democrats raising eyebrows. There were Republicans in that room who were not thrilled either. Hegseth's response, essentially, was to blame the previous administration for leaving the military under-resourced for this moment. Modernization that should have happened years ago through the regular budget, not through a war supplemental. We do have the largest military in the world, folks, so...
Yes, that is a thing. That is a thing. Meanwhile, the war itself hasn't paused for any of this paperwork. The ceasefire Trump had negotiated back in the spring officially ended on July 8th. And since then, we've seen an Iranian attack that's killed 2 U.S. soldiers at a base in Jordan. And Iranian authorities say at least 50 people inside Iran have been killed in the U.S. strike since hostilities resumed.
Right. And then there's the nuclear dimension, in case any of our listeners were still hoping to sleep tonight. So part of the entire justification for this war was, of course, stopping Iran from enriching uranium. And in the same stretch of news, we had the U.S. signing a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia that would eventually let them enrich uranium.
Yeah, I don't think you need a political science degree to see the tension there. So
you really don't. No. So now House Republicans are drafting a nearly $95 billion package that bundles war funding together with farm aid and, of course, some voting restrictions. So, that's a lot of very different priorities getting tied together in one very large bill.
It is. It definitely is. And listen, we could spend this whole entire episode on defense appropriations, and math, I guess. But that's not actually where we're headed today. We bring this up.
I'm actually glad we're not headed there, Marcus. Right. I'm not sure I would pass that math class.
Well, for your very sanity, we are not, Nora. We bring this up because it's the backdrop. It's the meanwhile, if you will, that the show is named for. While tens of billions of dollars move through Washington in a matter of weeks for a war overseas, there's a much slower, much quieter fight happening back home over what gets funded, what gets cut, and maybe most importantly for today's conversation, what gets taught.
Which brings us to our guest.
Yes, our guest today is Jesse Hagopian. Jesse is a Seattle-based educator and editor at the grassroots education magazine Rethinking Schools, and a parent of 2 kids currently in Seattle public schools. He's also the author of Teach Truth: The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education.
And I think Jesse's work is the perfect counterweight to everything we just laid out. Because when you're talking about a government that can find $37 billion or $70 billion and then another $95 billion, seemingly without breaking a sweat for a war that no one wants, it really does put a very fine point on the conversations happening in school board meetings and state legislatures across this country, where we constantly talk about not having enough money for classroom resources, for support staff, for mental health services, the kind of honest history curriculums that Jesse has spent his career fighting for.
Exactly. Jesse's been on the front lines of the fight against book bans and anti-critical race theory legislation for years now, testifying in front of legislatures, organizing teachers, writing about what happens when politically motivated fear starts dictating what kids are allowed to learn about their own country's history.
And actually, Marcus, this is a perfect moment to bring up something Jesse published just this week, and which kind of took over Seattle politics this week because it connects directly to everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, Jesse had a piece, an op-ed in the Stranger, which is the alt weekly here in Seattle, arguing for universal free school meals here in the city, timed around the city council's vote on the issue this week. And it got to be, I believe you actually made a cameo appearance. You and Mama Green, Nora, asked the public comments.
Very much outshined by your mother, Marcus.
Well, you endured 2 hours, I want to say, of public testimony before you were able to actually speak for your 1 minute. That's how much they allow here in Seattle. And then I want to say the entirety of the meeting was something like 4 hours.
Yeah. And to be clear for listeners who are not as embroiled in Seattle politics as we are, the mayor of Seattle, Katie Wilson, had said that she wanted to fund universal school meals, free school meals for all children, following the really successful programs that we've seen across 9 other states at this point. She wanted to fund them for the upcoming school year for kids. And then the Seattle City Council said, whoa, hold on. We're not sure we can afford that. Instead, we might want to take this money and spend it on emergency food support for the most needy kids and families on weekends and breaks. And that is super important too, right? But it was basically extending a program that we've already had that is means tested, that excludes a lot of families at the expense of doing something that was going to universally be available to help all school kids. So it became a very unpleasant fight this week for a lot of us, your mom included.
Yeah, and which, quite frankly, it just made no sense. The amount of money, to your point, that they were talking about was relatively paltry in terms of a municipal budget. And the fact is that this was this was actually, we spoke with Jesse, just as we were getting the news that the city council, in my humble opinion, and quite frankly, the majority of Seattle, I would say, did the right thing and actually, after all, decided to fund school meals, universal school meals. And that's, I don't know why they voted against it on Wednesday and somehow was able to find the money on Thursday. But I mean, miracles cease to, the miracles abound, I guess. Miracles do not cease. So anyway.
I mean, and this gets to a pattern that I think we keep seeing in progressive politics, where progressive politicians want to push something forward that they know is really evidence-backed and widely supported by a ton of voters, and they get pushback from their own party, these kind of neoliberal austerity freaks who are like, we don't have the kind of money for that, but we do have money for police cameras and detaining people and everything else, right? So I think the reason we wanted to highlight this is it's a microcosm on a small level of what we're seeing happen across a lot of different municipalities and states right now, of progressive leaders trying to kind of figure out how to wade through these fights in their own parties and give people what they actually want.
Yes. I mean, isn't that what they're, elected for? I don't
one would think. I don't know. I don't know anymore, Marcus.
Well, that said, Again, Jesse's did a wonderful piece in The Stranger. Even with the fact that, what he was advocating for ended up after some, sweating buckets, ended up eventually passing. It's still worth
Unnecessary
reading.
drama, let me tell
Yeah.
you what.
They call that Seattle politics, I believe. but anyway, what struck you about his piece, Nora?
Well, I think one of the pieces that I really loved about it was that he really rooted this not only in his own experiences as an instructor, but really in this really rich Seattle history. We were one of the real strongholds of the Black Panther Party, and one of the first places where they started their free breakfast program for children. And he really talks about what the legacy of that needs to be for our city in terms of how we think about who we have responsibility for, and how we provide benefits to our communities.
Yeah, which loops us right back to where we started this episode, because the money question isn't really hypothetical for Jesse. It's the whole ball game. Every fight over textbooks, every fight over a librarian position, every fight over whether a school can afford a counselor, that's a budget line somewhere. And when we're watching the federal government reshuffle tens of billions of dollars for war funding in a matter of weeks, I think it's worth asking what that same speed and flexibility would look like if it were pointed at a classroom instead of a battlefield.
Yes, yes. Okay, so without further ado, let's bring in Jesse Hagopian.
Jesse, thank you so much for being with us. You are definitely in a huge audience request, so I am glad we finally got you on here. I wish it was under better circumstances with some of the things that have recently happened, both in our country and in our city. And so we'll get right into it, though. You wrote a piece this week in The Stranger for our listeners who aren't in Seattle. That's essentially Seattle's alt weekly. And you wrote, "No teacher should have to become a food pantry." Now, that line has really struck me, and I know a lot of other people who read your op-ed, because it feels like it could apply to so many professions today. But, teachers specifically, y'all have become counselors, your social workers, your conflict mediators, your technology coaches, and now sometimes providers of basic necessities. So what does that expansion of the teacher's role tell us about the moment we're living in?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I love your work, Marcus, and
Thank you.
it's really great to be with you. And I agree. I wish it was under better circumstances, but I appreciate you picking up on that op-ed I wrote, because, people sometimes talk about this as just another policy debate or a line item in a budget, but I can't talk about it that way. I think about the faces of my students when I talk about this issue. I began my teaching career in Southeast Washington, D.C. I'd pass the White House every day on my way to one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the country. And this was a profound contradiction. I was teaching in the shadow of, the most powerful government in the world, and there wasn't a single full service grocery store in the entire neighborhood where I taught, right? So my students were coming to school hungry, not because their parents didn't love them or because their families weren't working hard, but because they were living in a food desert, because they were in a neighborhood with very few jobs. So the unemployment rate was really high. And because they were in a neighborhood that was shaped by decades of redlining and segregation and disinvestment, right? And years later, I found myself returning to my hometown of Seattle and teaching at my alma mater, Garfield High School. And now I'm in one of the wealthiest cities the world has ever known, and I'm still dealing with the problems of hunger, right? And I'll just tell you real quick, one of my students was a senior, an athlete. He was doing well in school. He was on track to graduate with a college scholarship. And then with only about a month left before graduation, just everything fell apart. His family's housing situation collapsed, and he was living on the street. And I didn't even know this. And I was pulled into a meeting with the principal and all of his teachers to say, hey, he's at risk of not being able to go to college because he's about to to fail his classes and not graduate, and then they'll pull his scholarship. And so, I still think about him all the time because we had to come together and make a plan to figure out how he was going to graduate, how he was going to eat every day. But how many students have I taught who were struggling with hunger and homelessness, but never told us, right? Because there's a lot of shame. And this student, it took him months to come forward and tell us what was happening in his life, right? And so, universal school meals really matter to me because I know the impact on kids.
Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of highlighting the human dimension of this, because even as a college professor, I have hungry students in my classes all the time. I know well, like the Costco run that you do before the quarter starts. I think a third of students at UW even right now are food insecure. And to me, it feels like the meeting the necessity of food is the baseline of what we can do for educational thriving. Unfortunately, the discussion that we saw in the Seattle City Council, I guess as of recording yesterday, over universal school meals this week, I think it became emblematic of these broader challenges that we're seeing within the Democratic Party and progressive movements, where we have this fight over something that should be a basic good and end up kind of tearing each other down in the process. I think someone was saying on Blue Sky yesterday that like in Seattle, we have the party of no, we don't deserve good things, and the party of like, yes, we do deserve good things. How do you want people to stay focused on the issues of equity and community needs when it comes to education policy in situations like this?
I think that everyone involved in this debate at the city council does want hungry kids to be able to eat, right? I think we're not talking about folks that want to steal food from hungry kids. We're talking about all of us believe that every kid should be able to eat, and that's a prerequisite to learning. The question is, what's the best way to get there? And I've heard one of the main arguments against universal school meals is that we shouldn't be buying lunch for a bunch of wealthy kids, right? But, I think that no progressive would argue against universal health care because some wealthy people can afford to pay for a doctor's visit, right? We all realize the simple principle that if everybody needs something to live and to fully participate in society, then everyone has to have access to it, right?
To your point, Jesse, really quickly, as my mom made, not interrupt you, was that, well, do we, nobody is saying that we don't need, well, some people are, but most people aren't saying we don't need universal law enforcement, right? And let Laurelhurst and, these rich neighborhoods pay for it, and maybe we can save some money then. But when it comes to feeding kids, all of a sudden, there's some issues with equity. But anyway, my bad to interrupt.
No, thank you for that, right? It's like, look, no one's saying, hey, let's not pay for public transportation because a rich person might get on the light rail, right? Right? Like, yes, the vast majority of people who get on the light rail are going to be people who don't have a ton of money, right? And there may be a few rich people that get on that light rail and get somewhere, but it's going to end up helping all of us to have a form of transportation other than cars all the time, right? And so we don't stop providing public goods because everyone benefits. We provide them because everyone needs them. And we know food isn't a luxury. It's an essential to learning. It's just as essential as the classroom or everything else, the books that we have. And so, yeah, this has got to be provided for everybody. I like your idea of making or your mom's idea of making Laurelhurst pay for their own. Let's think about that.
We might need to get public testimony to that as well soon. But anyhow, I do want to ask you. I know you're a James Baldwin fan,
No doubt.
as I am.
Oh man, Baldwin.
But yeah, just a maestro with prose there. But he once said that children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. So, in your opinion, if someone wanted to understand America in 2026, could they just simply spend a week inside a public school?
Yeah, no doubt. Because Baldwin also said the children are all of ours, right? He's
Yeah, we
saying,
going quote for quote today. I love it.
right? He said the children everywhere are all of ours. And if you go into the public schools, you're going to meet those children and you're going to see the vast amount of need that's going on in a city of plenty, right? A city that would make the pharaohs jealous for the amount of wealth that is here. A city with 54,000 millionaires, 11 billionaires, right? A city where the wealth is just piling up, and you can go into the public schools. You can go to any public school, even a public school in the more expensive neighborhoods, and find kids who are hungry, right? And that's a damning statement about our city, our nation, and our society, right? And I would challenge folks to spend some time looking at the statistics about poverty in this wealthy city. And I would challenge folks to spend some time in the after school programs and really understand the impact that this crushing poverty and hunger is having. And it's disproportionately impacting Black and brown kids. There's absolutely no doubt about that, right? And that's exactly why we need universal programs, to make sure no kids fall through the cracks.
Jesse, it strikes me that education has become this site of so many political contestations right now, but also some of the stupidest fights in politics, whether it's trans sports debates or pronouns or curriculum or lunch. Why do you think that is? And what would you prefer that people actually focus on? If we were going to have, some actual controversies that we were going to dig in on around schools, what would we do better to spend our time on?
Well, the right wing is scapegoating our most vulnerable children. And this is such an absurd and outrageous attack. They're trying to convince you and I that the problem with society is that vulnerable trans kid who just wants to be included on the sports team. The problem isn't Donald Trump, megalomaniac, who is using billions of dollars to bomb girls' schools in Iran instead of providing universal free meals here at home. The problem is that vulnerable kid who just wants a community to be a part of, right? Who wants to be affirmed. And the problem from the right wing perspective is that the families coming here trying to find jobs and take care of one another are the problem in our society, not the billionaires siphoning off the wealth to the richest 1%. And that's a smoke and mirrors game. That's the oldest trick. That's the divide and conquer game that they've been playing since they first invented race, right? Since they first invented race to divide white indentured servants and enslaved Black people so they would never come together again and fight a massive rebellion like happened during Bacon's rebellion, right? Since they first invented race when they were colonizing this land, they have needed scapegoats for the problem so that we don't turn our attention to the real problem, the wealthiest in this nation who are hoarding that wealth and using it against us.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, on that note, I mean, you sort of talked about how certain things are being used and weaponized. One of the things that I've hate to say it, but I've grown kind of tired and exhausted by is sort of this cynical weaponization of equity, quote unquote, to be, used to many times, unfortunately, launder either right-wing talking points or right-wing outcomes, or outcomes that are very narrowed and not and not universal in their scope, and many times ends up actually, producing inequitable outcomes. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, I know that's been weaponized in a lot of areas of society, but particularly in education, it seems.
No, for sure. I mean, we see folks say that we have to flood the schools with high stakes testing, high stakes standardized testing, because it'll help Black kids, right? Their argument is that we have to measure uh, the quote unquote achievement gap over and over and over again, and that will end up helping Black kids. That's an argument very similar to somebody who would say, like, if a kid fell overboard on a boat into freezing cold water, and we rescue that child, pull them up on the boat, and then the idea from these people is we would take their temperature again and again and again and again. And right now we have 113 high stakes standardized tests that the average K through 12 kid has to take right now. So we got to take their temperature again and again and again before we do anything like wrap them in a blanket uh, and get them warm. No, what we need is the wraparound services. We need the after school tutoring programs. We need the smaller class sizes, right? We need more Black and brown teachers in there. We need holistic curriculum that teaches us the truth, right? We need all these programs that have been demonstrated to raise achievement and help. We don't need more standardized testing. So your point that the language of equity is being weaponized against the very people that are furthest away from educational justice is so true. And unfortunately, we're seeing that again with this debate around school meals, because universal programs are one of the greatest achievement for all of our kids. They eliminate stigma. That's one of the most important parts about it. Like, poor kids don't have to demonstrate just how little their families make, and they don't have to stand in a line that identifies them uh, as not making a whole lot, right? They can just get their meal like everybody else. Um, and I think that, the evidence is clear that universal school meals work, right? Because 9 states have already implemented this. So if you're going to argue against universal school meals, if you're going to say that we should not implement universal school meals because it will not help Black and brown children, then you have to look at the 9 states that have already implemented universal school meals, and you have to argue against all the studies, the avalanche of studies that have come out of all 9 of those states that show that those furthest away from educational justice, Black and brown kids, low income kids, have benefited the most from it. And if you don't address that, then you're missing the point, right? The research consistently shows that universal school meals reduce hunger, reduce stigma, increase participation in school, improve attendance, support better academic outcomes. It's like standing in the rain and arguing that umbrellas don't work. Whether, do umbrellas work or not? We already know they do. The only question is, are we willing to open them?
Yeah. Well, and it's especially frustrating when so much money gets spent on things that don't have those kinds of outcomes in schools, right? I mean, I'm sure that you are teaching in a place that is being flooded with new technologies that do not have these kinds of outcomes, right? So, I mean, one of the things that was killing me about this debate, was just how narrow the focus was between these two things, rather than a broader debate about where we're spending our resources as a city. Um, I guess I want to push you a little bit to kind of help us understand what the kind of like resource environment looks like for you as an educator right now. Like, where would you rather see resources going, and where also would you rather see resources being kind of pulled away, or like, where are we wasting our resources, slim as they are?
I know it. Thank you for that question. And you know, I've taught at the elementary, middle, and high school levels for over 20 years. I'm not in the classroom right now because I'm dealing with long COVID. So thankfully, I'm able to continue being an educator by doing online classes for educators. I'm leading the Teaching for Black Lives campaign nationally, and I'm working with educators across the country to help them be better prepared to teach Black children, but all children, about the importance of Black history, right? So I'm not in the classroom at this moment, but my 20 years of experience in public schools has taught me that often policymakers don't fully understand uh, the priorities that need to be made in order to uplift our most vulnerable children. And yeah, Seattle's one of the wealthiest cities there is. And a city really shouldn't be judged by how many cranes are on its skyline, or how many skyscrapers, or how tall those skyscrapers are, or how much wealth flows through the economy. A city has to be judged by how that wealth is shared, and if that wealth is used to, feed children and feed their dreams, right? And so when we think about what we need to prioritize in the budget in order to meet the needs of ordinary people in this city, it's really clear to me that we've had some very skewed priorities for a long time. The most recent police budget was shocking to me. I mean, it's just after everything that happened in 2020, where finally there was a national conversation about what public safety could really mean and what kind of investments would support actual public safety, that our city has really diverged from what people so loudly spoke in the largest protest in US history. The most number of people participated in the 2020 uprising than any other protest in US history, right? And if we listen to those voices during that movement, we would be able to better understand the misplaced values of the budget that we see, where police got a massive raise in Seattle. And some people argued that that was needed to attract more. I disagreed with that. But one thing that I think it was shocking to many people is that there was an increase, this massive increase in their budget, even as Seattle taxpayers have had to pay nearly $60 million to settle lawsuits involving police misconduct, right? And then, um, you know, it just is baffling that you have no added accountability measures. You're just shoveling money into the police department without any added accountability measures, but you demand accountability to families in Seattle to prove what their income is in order to eat. And I'll tell you this, you can go on the Seattle Public Schools website and look at what
Jesse, really quickly. Man,
yes.
we literally got breaking news as
What?
of right now.
What?
Amy Amy Sunderberg from the Urbanist, she's just reported that there's a new announcement that Seattle Council members Dan Strauss, Joy Hollingsworth, and Dion Foster have said they will fund universal school meals starting.
Way. No way.
Yeah.
Are you messing with me?
No.
Starting when?
Wow. So the pressure. Man, maybe they were listening to this podcast.
They're going to fund universal school meals starting this fall, after all, by using the general funds. The commentary that this is hard to see, this is anything but a realization of the high political price they paid for their votes yesterday.
Wow.
There you go.
Wow, that's breathtaking.
Anyway.
And it just is such a testament to what I try to teach my kids and teach teachers about, that every important change that we have made in our society ever has been the result of organized communities fighting back and demanding their rights. And here it is right in front of us. You know, my son went and testified for universal school meals, and I'm going to be able to show him the power of his voice now, not just tell him about the civil rights movement or about Reconstruction, but I'm going to be able to show him that he was powerful right now. And so,
really cool.
Oh, that's special. Thank you for that.
And I just want to shout out all the students who spoke yesterday. Some really powerful testimony. And I think the most powerful thing that came out was just people saying, no, we don't have to choose between these two things. We want both of them. We want both of these good things for our communities. And they got it. Yeah.
That's right. We want free meals on the weekends and during the summers for kids. And we want every kid during the week to eat, right? Why do we have to have either or in the world, one of the world's richest cities? And you know, I am really proud of our community for standing up for themselves, and I'm grateful for the reversal on the city council for recognizing the arguments that we made. Not every city council would actually listen, so I gotta say that. And
respect where it's due. Yeah, I got you.
Exactly. Like, hey, that's a testament to their ability to listen to community and reverse course. And I think, you know, one of the strongest arguments that we made is just that, you know, so many kids who don't qualify for free and reduced lunch actually are struggling, right? I mean, when you look at the cutoff line, right, there can be families of 4 making $60,000 a year who don't qualify for free and reduced meals, right? And so, you know, we know that trying to live in Seattle with a 4-person family on $60,000 a year is a non-starter.
Yeah. Even before all the food prices went up.
Yes, even before Trump started bombing Iran and driving fuel prices up, and just the inflation that's impacted Seattle some of the hardest. And now so many families that were going hungry are going to get free meals. This is a victory for the people, and it's one that I think is really credited to the Black Panther Party of Seattle. You know, they started this idea that kids should be able to eat before they go to school. And it was people like Aaron Dixon, the captain of the Black Panther Party in Seattle, who helped to found the free breakfast program in Seattle and get kids of all backgrounds, you know, mostly Black kids, but they didn't turn anybody away, and to allow them to eat. And that put pressure on city, state, and federal governments to feed kids, right? Because they didn't want a bunch of hungry kids coming and learning that the government couldn't provide, and that maybe they should join the Panthers if they wanted to be able to eat, right? So that pressure led to free meals in schools, right? But that history is too often left out. So I'm grateful to the ancestors.
I just want to say, I know there was some disputed history, so I'm glad you gave the accurate version. Anyway, and I'll leave it there. I will leave it there. No, Nora's like, don't say nothing else. Jesse, I gotta ask you too, man, just because we live in this, hyper polarized world, supposedly hyper polarized nation. where when you look at public schools specifically, they do seem like they are the last institution and maybe last best institution, right? Where children from radically different backgrounds are expected to share the same space. And so, as so much of American life becomes fragmented by a class, ideology, even algorithms, what do you think happens to democracy if public schools themselves start to become fragmented?
Yes. Oh, I appreciate you zooming out and asking the big questions, because we have to tackle those as well as the individual programs. And I'll start by saying that the public schools aren't perfect, right? We got to make huge changes, especially in this era of what I call truth crime laws, right? They're almost half of all children in the United States today go to a school where there's a law or policy that forbids teachers from teaching honestly about systemic racism. And how can you teach about Black history without teaching about the freedom struggles that oppose that systemic racism, right? So we have the problem of the censorship of books and curriculum that's going on. And it wasn't just these truth crime laws, right? We know corporate textbooks have existed for decades and generations that have miseducated youth about American history, right? And so we got big changes to make in order to make the schools what they should be. But we also know that in an era of neoliberalism that has destroyed unions across this country, right? That have, uh, this era has led to the most unprecedented wealth gap in U.S. history, right? And part of that is destroying all public institutions, including public education. And the public schools are one of the last things, libraries and public schools are one of the last things that the government provides to communities across this country. And if we don't fight to protect those, right, we are really going to be completely abandoned to the whims of the rich. And so, what we need to do is fight to transform and strengthen public schools and to wrestle the money away from those who would rather invest in bombing schools abroad, who would rather invest in colonizing Mars, right? They We're in an era where what's considered reality is investing in colonizing Mars. Whitey's not on the moon anymore. He's going past that. He's going to Mars. And right, what's unrealistic is feeding and clothing and housing everybody. That's the agenda they have on offer. And we have to say no. No, actually there's enough money, right, to educate everybody and meet all of our basic needs if we have the priority and the social movement to get there.
Yeah. Jesse, one of the things that I think I appreciate most about your work is just how much you have sort of reclaimed the radical history of education in our country. And I just want to sidebar really quickly that my daughter is a kid who has really benefited from the BLM in Schools initiative, where it has been integrated across her school's curriculum. I remember she came home from kindergarten on her first day, and I was like, "Oh, what did you guys do in kindergarten?" She goes, "Transformative justice." I was like, day one lesson. It was so cool. So, yeah, but I guess I want to ask you, what steps do you want to see educators and parent and community groups taking as we head into the next school year to really ensure that our education maintains those radical roots and really digs deep on them rather than abandoning them because of the kind of threat of right-wing, pushback?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And I think that we can learn a lot from the Black Lives Matter at School movement, and we can further that movement if we want to see educational justice. It started in 2016 when a white supremacist made a bomb threat right here in Seattle at John Muir Elementary School, because the educators there had the audacity to want to lift up the Black lives of the children they taught. And they, the art teacher, Julie Trout, designed a shirt that said Black Lives Matter, we stand together, John Muir Elementary. And they're all going to wear that shirt and high five the kids on the way into school in September, right? Not waiting for Black History Month to celebrate Black kids, but doing it at the beginning of the year. And that offended racists. And so they wanted to murder children because of that. And to the credit of that community, even though the school district canceled the event and brought in bomb sniffing dogs that morning, they went through it with it anyway. It was smaller than it would have been without that threat, though, and that hurt my heart. And so a bunch of us educators went to those teachers at John Muir and we said, how can we help you? And we came up with an idea of having Black Lives Matter at School Day, where every teacher would wear a shirt that says Black Lives Matter at school, right? Across the country, across the city, because they couldn't make a bomb threat against every Seattle school. And, we delivered shirts north, south, east, and west, over 2,000 shirts delivered, and many schools made their own shirts. So on that day, some 3,000 educators wore the shirts and taught lessons about the Black freedom struggle. It was breathtaking. And we had a community event that evening at Washington Hall that brought together students showing off their talents, whether it was tap dancing or poetry, spoken word, speaking out on the issues that matter to them in schools. And it was picked up by the news, and the teachers in Philadelphia saw what we had done, and they transformed our day of action into a week of action. And then it became a national movement. And now tens of thousands of parents, students, and educators across the country participate in the Black Lives Matter at School movement during the first week of February every year. And so I think the lesson from that is that when parents, teachers, and students get together, we're a powerful force. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people who are either a parent, a student, or an educator in this country. And educators are the biggest unions left. That's why the right wing hates them so much, right? And when we join forces and talk about a vision for the public schools, it's really a vision for a broader transformation of society, because you can't have educational justice in a broader society of injustice, right? And so these issues start to connect. And I think launching movements, whether it was the movement to stop the school closures that we saw that was victorious a couple years ago, or this movement to win universal school meals, shows that when we pick issues that most impact Black and brown and low income families, and we build broad multiracial coalitions to fight for those, right? We can win anything we want.
Absolutely. Today is a perfect day to say this. But Jesse, I want to ask you, this is maybe, I don't want to say it's slightly less important, but because this is important, but I guess this is going right into the classroom at this point, where we're entering into a world where AI can write essays, summarize books, even supposedly tutor students. The author Dave Eggers, he was speaking to OpenAI employees this week about the impacts of AI, and he called them catastrophic to educators, and said that when students use it, their voice is stolen from them. He also said that they'll never have an opportunity to say their truth and tell their own story. And so I want to ask you, just in this sort of brave new world we find ourselves in, how are you going about approaching AI with your students as an educator? And if knowledge is becoming increasingly accessible, what's becoming the real purpose of school? Is it to be more of a focus on critical thinking at this point?
Yes, this is the vital question we have to ask right now. if we are going to save education from just becoming indoctrination. And I would say that the vision that the billionaire class has for the public schools is one of creating a system to rank and sort students and to filter in low income and black and brown kids into low wage jobs and identify a few people to become managers of our system. And the vision that we have to have for education is about empowering youth to identify problems in our society and find collective solutions to those problems. And so we have very different goals. Now, AI is a tool that is very well suited for ranking and sorting kids into low income jobs and then a few into the managerial positions. But if we want kids to be able to think critically and to be able to build collectively, we have to help students develop their voice. Now, the vision of people like Bill Gates, who has said that AI will replace most teachers and doctors in the next 20 years. The vision of those people is to replace teachers with chatbots, right? And that chatbots can make students more efficient at the basic literacy and numeracy, right? But that's not my goal as an educator. And actually, I think our kids need mentorship. I think our kids need love before they can learn. And a chatbot can't provide those things. A chatbot can't see when a student is struggling with their identity and how that is part of the problem that's coming through in their difficulty being able to read or write. And chatbots can't nurture our kids. And we know that that is the foundation of learning. And so we need a lot of the things that were part of the freedom schools that the civil rights movement built, that organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee understood. That education has to be about collective dialogue and about real life problems, right? And so that's why their program in Freedom Summer of 1964 brought thousands of people around Mississippi to start freedom schools and have the education culminate not in a high stakes standardized test, but in registering someone to vote, right? Or in recruiting someone else to a freedom school, right? Or organizing a protest or a sit-in, right? This should be the measures of our education. Is it helping to transform our society and make it more just and equitable? Or is it just pushing the status quo? And chatbots are really good at pushing the status quo, at teaching kids how to narrowly develop skills that will make them attractive to different corporations. But it's not very good at helping them collectively fight back.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, it's so striking to me that they want to take some of the most sacred forms of human to human work, right? Like education and healing, and turn those over to the robots. It's just a very grim vision of humanity. We like to end by asking every guest some version of this question. And I promise it's not as grim as our other questions have been. Our it's kind of derives from the name of our show, of this feeling of kind of living in this strange meanwhile between the world that is disappearing and whatever comes next, and the way that many of us have this kind of vessel of hope for what might come next, but not really a vision for how we're going to get there. If public education is one place where that future is sort of quietly and relentlessly being built every day. What gives you hope when you walk into classrooms or talk to educators?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no doubt that we're in dire times, right? There's rising fascism. Trump refuses to follow laws, right? And our immigrant neighbors are being snatched off the street and deported, some of them killed, right? We live in an era of mass incarceration where, you know, the quote unquote land of the free has the most unfree people of any nation in the history of the world behind bars, right? There's no doubt that we face enormous challenges. And yet, I have incredible inspirations of hope that keep me going in this struggle. And, you know, the young people who testified yesterday and won universal school meals show you why it's not the right time to give up hope. You know, my students who helped to build the 2020 uprising in this nation taught me something and taught the world something, right? When everybody was talking about learning loss and how our black and brown students were going to be hopelessly behind forever, they were out in the streets, not only learning, but teaching the world about what systemic racism was and how to challenge it, right? And I take inspiration from my ancestors. My dad recently discovered which plantation our family was enslaved on. And so the last couple years, we've been traveling back to Mississippi and to Louisiana to visit those places. And, you know, I found out that my great grandma Laura Lenoir was enslaved on the Lenoir plantation. We found the plantation, we set foot on the plantation, and we found a document in the courthouse that had her signature on it that showed that she could read and write. A lot of the documents had X's on it, but not hers, right? And so, in a time when it was illegal for Black people to learn to read and write, she had learned to read and write. And then, when emancipation came, and she put all 14 of her children through college, right? This incredible victory. And one of those children, my great grandfather, became a teacher and then a principal and started schools across the Jim Crow South. This is at a time when the Klan was burning down Black schools because they were afraid of the power of knowledge and Black history, right? And so I know that if my ancestors could face slavery and bring that down, could face Jim Crow segregation and bring that down, that right here, this problem we have right now, I know that we can figure out how to organize our communities to fight back and win too.
Amen to that.
What an extraordinary history. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Jesse, this has been as much of a pleasure as this has been for Nora and myself. I know it's been that much more of a pleasure for our listeners. You are such a gem and a gift to our city. And so thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor to be here with you. Anytime you need anything, y'all. Really appreciate the work you're doing.
Hopefully it won't be the last time we have you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're a good luck charm, man. We just getting good policy every time
we
you're
got
on.
bad news, we're going to bring you on.
Honestly, Nora, I don't think we necessarily need to do a long recap on Jesse's talk, other than just to say, my God, it's amazing.
What a great interlude we had from the news tracker as well.
Yeah, that was, and that, I mean, and it, I hate to sort of, I guess, be basic here, but like, I mean, that is my 8 ounces of joy officially.
You get to claim that. Yeah. I think we had a lot of agony over this, what we thought was a policy loss over the last 24 hours.
and such a needless, petty one, right? I mean, like, I think there are definitely things to fight over. particularly in Seattle, that folks aren't always going to be agreeable on. But I think the fact that we needed, that this wasn't one of them. Like, we can afford to feed all kids. We can afford not to delay feeding them, and so let's feed them. And it was that simple. So anyhow, yeah. What about you, Nora? Any additional joys or?
Well, I have one other in a weird way that I didn't recognize until I was about to say it. It also relates to this week's theme. So for 3 years now, my daughter has participated in like the most hippie Seattle summer camp one could possibly imagine. It's a songwriting camp in a yurt in the woods where they take all these like 8 to 10-year-olds and like have them write songs. And then at the end of the week, they put out an album and they have an album release party with all of these like wackadoodle songs that these kids have written. And it has rapidly become the highlight of my summer because there is something so genuinely beautiful about kids finding their voices and just writing about stuff that they love. And there's something so heartfelt about the way that these kids express themselves in song. They write a lot about food. And I think there was a chicken nugget song this year, and there was a burrito song last year. And they also write a lot about things like how much they love trees and friendships and like home and all these like beautiful, really like genuine things that I think sometimes to see the world through the way that a kid sees the world is a really beautiful thing. Plus, this year they held an impromptu funeral for a rat that had died in the yurt that they named Otto. And so they ended their album release party with a very heartfelt series of funeral dedications to Otto the rat. It was as weird as you can possibly imagine. It was great. I definitely recommend writing songs with kids as my joy this week.
Not a bad one at all. Not a bad one at all. Well, on that note, and so many high notes that we've discussed today, shall we go ahead and bid adieu to our audience?
Let's do it.
All right.
Well, dear listeners, congrats to all of us because we have made it through another week with at least some of our intestinal fortitude and brain cells intact. Heavy emphasis on the word some.
Yes, massive thanks to Jesse Hagopian for coming in and sharing not just the policy fights, but the classroom level stuff, the snacks in the desk drawer, the kids whose stomachs are growling before first period even starts. There's a reason we keep coming back to people who are actually standing in the front of the classroom and not just talking about it from a podium. Jesse's the one who has to make the abstractions real for a room full of ninth graders.
And a huge shout out to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who takes our completely scattered, spiraling, occasionally unhinged conversations, sometimes punctuated with real news alerts, and somehow edits them into a show that suggests that we have slept, read, and maybe even touched grass recently. Jessica, we have not, just to be clear. You are doing a hero's work.
Yes, and also enormous thanks to Oham Aluo for music so good it tricks people into thinking what follows is a well-adjusted discussion instead of just two people politely screaming about school funding and war budgets into a microphone.
You can catch In the Meanwhile Wednesdays at 5 on KVRU or wherever you stream podcasts while opening one tab for news, one tab for snacks, and one tab for should I move to another country? We see you.
And if today's conversation got you thinking about what's actually on your own school board's agenda or your own city council's for that matter, go read Jesse's latest. It's a quick read and it might change how you think about that next vote. You never know.
New episodes drop every Friday. Until then, maybe don't get all your emotional regulation from push notifications. We will see you in the meanwhile.